The Alaskan wind sliced through spruce trees, sharp as a blade. Elias Kane knelt by a frozen riverbank, tracing a huge paw print in the snow. He exhaled, breath curling like smoke. Behind him, Amos, a massive grizzly, stirred, his fur catching the dusk's last light. Amos was Elias's only trust in a world that took everything. 3 days ago, Elias found a steel trap, baited, hidden under pine needles. It wasn't for foxes, it was for Amos. The bear snorted, eyes scanning the trees. Elias rested a hand on his shoulder. "Easy, old friend." The grizzly's warmth grounded him. 5 years back, Elias was a Denali ranger with a wife Clara and daughter Lily, who drew bears on his truck's dashboard. Then came the fire, the betrayal. He walked away into the wild. Amos, a cub found in a poacher's ashes, ribs stark, leg gashed, became his salvation. Elias stitched him up, fed him. They stayed together. Now, trouble closed in. Tire tracks near the logging road meant hunters, not for meat but trophies. Elias moved through the forest, Amos's steps heavy, silent. At a clearing, he found another trap, disarmed it with a stick. Amos growled. "Quiet," Elias whispered, scanning the still air. From a ridge, Elias saw a campfire below. 3 men, their rifles new, one laughing about 10 grand for the pelt. His grip tightened. Amos shifted, sensing rage. Elias could flee with Amos, but the traps would stay, endangering others. He chose to fight, for Amos, for the wild. At midnight, Elias crept to their camp using ranger tricks. Pine sap to mast scent, soft steps. He cut their drone's wires, spilled their fuel, smashed their radio. A man stirred. Elias froze, knife ready. The man snored. Elias slipped back to Amos, retreating to a juniper-hidden cave. Inside, Elias built a small fire. Amos lay close. Elias sharpened his knife, recalling Amos's weak cub cries, the blood he'd stitched. He'd promised to protect him. The wind howled outside, carrying smoke. The men would come. Elias knew the land. Every ridge, every stream. He'd use it. Tomorrow, the hunt began. Elias wouldn't be prey. The cave's damp air wrapped Elias Kane like a cold, heavy cloak as he crouched near its jagged mouth, his knife carving deep notches into a weathered spruce stick, one for each trap he'd destroyed. 6 now, each a silent threat to Amos. The massive grizzly lay beside him, his dark eyes catching the faint glow of dawn seeping through the cave's entrance. A sharp snap outside, a branch under a boot, made Amos's ears twitch, his low growl rumbling through the stone floor like a distant quake. Carver was close, too close, and Elias felt the hunt's pressure coiling tighter, a noose around his heart. Elias's mind drifted to Lily, her small hands clutching a crayon in their Denali cabin, drawing a bear with a lopsided grin. "That's you and Daddy," she'd said, her giggle bright as summer light. The memory sliced through him, sharper than the Alaskan wind howling outside. He'd failed her and Clara, lost them to a fire set by a smuggling ring he'd exposed. Wolves, bears, even eagles, sold to rich men across oceans. The guilt was a stone lodged in his chest, but Amos, the cub he'd pulled from a poacher's ashes, ribs stark, leg gashed, was his redemption. Yesterday's rifle shot grazing the cliff proved Carver wasn't just after Amos's pelt for 10 grand. He wanted Elias broken, his spirit crushed in the snow. Dawn bled gray over the valley, painting the sprawl of snow and jagged stone in muted tones. Elias packed his gear, knife, rope, a flint wrapped in worn leather, and checked Amos's scarred leg, stiff from the cold but strong. The bear rose, shaking frost from his fur, his bulk a silent vow of loyalty. They slipped out, hugging the cliff's edge, the frozen river below glinting like a blade under the rising sun. Elias's boots crunched softly, his eyes catching a fresh boot print near a juniper, its edges crisp in the snow. Carver had circled them in the night, a predator studying his mark, leaving no trace but this deliberate sign. The cave's damp air wrapped Elias Kane like a cold, heavy cloak as he crouched near its jagged mouth, his knife carving deep notches into a weathered spruce stick, one for each trap he'd destroyed. 6 now, each a silent threat to Amos. The massive grizzly lay beside him, his dark eyes catching the faint glow of dawn seeping through the cave's entrance. A sharp snap outside, a branch under a boot, made Amos's ears twitch, his low growl rumbling through the stone floor like a distant quake. Carver was close, too close, and Elias felt the hunt's pressure coiling tighter, a noose around his heart. Elias's mind drifted to Lily, her small hands clutching a crayon in their Denali cabin, drawing a bear with a lopsided grin. "That's you and Daddy," she'd said, her giggle bright as summer light. The memory sliced through him, sharper than the Alaskan wind howling outside. He'd failed her and Clara, lost them to a fire set by a smuggling ring he'd exposed. Wolves, bears, even eagles, sold to rich men across oceans. The guilt was a stone lodged in his chest, but Amos, the cub he'd pulled from a poacher's ashes, ribs stark, leg gashed, was his redemption. Yesterday's rifle shot grazing the cliff proved Carver wasn't just after Amos's pelt for 10 grand. He wanted Elias broken, his spirit crushed in the snow. Dawn bled gray over the valley, painting the sprawl of snow and jagged stone in muted tones. Elias packed his gear, knife, rope, a flint wrapped in worn leather, and checked Amos's scarred leg, stiff from the cold but strong. The bear rose, shaking frost from his fur, his bulk a silent vow of loyalty. They slipped out, hugging the cliff's edge, the frozen river below glinting like a blade under the rising sun. Elias's boots crunched softly, his eyes catching a fresh boot print near a juniper, its edges crisp in the snow. Carver had circled them in the night, a predator studying his mark, leaving no trace but this deliberate sign. They moved north to a pine grove, its ravine cloaked in dense hemlocks, their needles whispering in the wind. Amos froze, nose twitching, as a raven cawed overhead, its black wings carving tight circles against the slate-gray clouds, a harbinger of trouble. Elias pulled Amos behind a moss-covered boulder, smearing mud across his own face to dull his outline, rubbing ash on his knife to kill its glint. "Stay low, big guy," he whispered, his breath warm against Amos's ear. The bear's massive frame settled, his eyes steady, trusting. Boots crunched from the east, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat in the silence. Through the pines, Elias saw Carver, lean, rifle slung but ready, eyes calm as a wolf stalking prey. He moved like he owned the wild, scanning the ground with a tracker's precision, his breath steaming in the cold. Elias needed to act before Carver closed the gap. He remembered an old ranger trick, misdirection through chaos. He found a dry stream bed, its banks slick with ice, and rigged a trap, a taut rope tied to a young sapling, weighted with heavy, jagged rocks. If Carver stepped wrong, it'd tangle his legs, maybe break bone. Elias worked fast, his hands steady despite the chill numbing his fingers. Amos watching with a stillness that felt like a shared pulse. The trap sprang perfectly. Carver's silhouette appeared, sharp against the snow-dusted pines. He paused, studying the streambed, then stepped. The rope snapped, rocks tumbled with a dull thud, and Carver stumbled, cursing, his voice cutting through the quiet. Elias charged from the shadows, swinging a thick spruce branch. It cracked against Carver's shoulder, sending his rifle skidding across the ice into a snowbank. Carver spun, faster than Elias expected, his fist slamming into Elias's jaw. Pain exploded, hot and bright, but Elias tackled him into the snow, grappling hard. Snow stung their faces, the cold biting deeper than their blows. Carver snarled, "You're done, Kane!" his elbow driving into Elias's ribs, sending a jolt of pain through his side. Elias thought of Clara's soft voice reading to Lily, the fire's roar that took them. Rage surged. He slammed his knee into Carver's gut, pinning him. Amos roared from the trees, his shadow massive, fur bristling like a storm cloud. Carver froze, eyes wide, fear cracking his calm. Elias leaned close, voice raw as torn bark. "Leave, or you don't walk out of this valley." Amos stepped closer, claws scraping frozen ground, his growl shaking the air like thunder. Carver's bravado shattered. He nodded, scrambling back, clawing for his rifle, and bolted into the pines, his steps fading into the wind. Elias slumped against the boulder, panting, blood trickling from his lip, his jaw throbbing. Amos nudged him, his warm muzzle steadying Elias's shaking hands. "Good boy," Elias muttered, wincing as he touched his bruise. The victory was fleeting. Carver would return, and not alone. Elias sensed a deeper shadow, NorthPulse, a name whispered in his past, tied to the smuggling ring that burned his life to ash. It wasn't just about Amos's pelt. It was about power, greed, the wild itself. Night fell, cold and heavy, the stars sharp as knives. Elias led Amos to a hollow under a fallen cedar, its branches shielding them from the wind's bite. He built a small fire, its glow dancing on Amos's fur, casting shadows that flickered like memories. Elias pulled out Clara and Lily's photo, its edges soft from years in his coat. "I'm trying," he whispered, his voice breaking, a tear cutting through the mud on his cheek. Amos's eyes met his, deep and unyielding, like the heart of the wild. The raven cawed again, distant but piercing. Elias doused the fire, gripping his knife, its weight grounding him. The valley was no longer safe, but he wasn't running. He'd choose his ground, and he'd fight. For Amos, for the wild, for the ashes he carried in his heart. Snow fell thick, muffling the Alaskan valley's edges, cloaking the world in a soft, relentless hush. Elias Kane stood on a frozen ridge, his breath steaming in the frigid air, his knife strapped to his boot, its worn handle a familiar weight. Amos, the grizzly, loomed beside him, his fur dusted white, his dark eyes locked on the horizon where the mountains met the sky. A mechanical hum pierced the quiet. Drones, their whine sharp and unnatural, signaling a threat far bigger than Carver alone. Elias led Amos into the mountain's heart, where cliffs rose like jagged jagged, broken teeth, and pines stood dense, their branches heavy with snow. The valley below was no longer home. It was a battlefield, scarred by greed. Carver's retreat yesterday was a feint, Elias knew, a hunter's pause before the kill. By noon, he found proof. A hidden camp, half a mile from the ravine, its contents chilling his blood. Crates of tranq darts, motion sensors glinting like eyes, a satellite radio branded NorthPulse. That name. He'd seen it on a truck the night Clara and Lily's cabin burned. The night the smuggling ring he'd fought took everything. NorthPulse wasn't just after Amos's pelt for 10 grand. They wanted the valley's bears, wolves, its silence, stripped bare for profit, turned into trophies and dollars. Amos growled low, sensing Elias's rage, his massive frame tensing. Elias rested a hand on his flank, the bear's warmth steadying him. "We end this, big guy," he said, voice firm. They retreated to a high cave, its mouth overlooking the valley like a sentinel. Elias rigged defenses, tripwires strung with rocks, sharpened branches wedged in snowdrifts, their tips gleaming with frost. He wasn't a ranger anymore, but the wild pulsed in his veins, a rhythm he'd never lost. Dusk brought 3 drones, their red lights slicing through the blizzard like blood in water. Carver's voice crackled through a speaker, amplified, cold. "Kane, you're out of moves. Give us the bear, or we burn you out." Elias doused his fire, its embers hissing, grabbed his rope, and moved. Amos followed, his bulk silent despite the crunch of snow. They descended a game trail, Elias's boots gripping ice, the storm cloaking their path. The drones buzzed above, their heat sensors useless in the blizzard's chaos. Elias reached Carver's camp, 6 men now, their NorthPulse gear gleaming under portable lights. Carver stood apart, scanning the dark, his rifle slung but ready. Elias struck fast. A tripwire dropped rocks on one man, his groan muffled as he collapsed. Elias sliced a drone's battery pack with his knife, sending it crashing into a pine, sparks flaring. Amos charged, his roar shaking the valley, scattering 2 men into the shadows. Elias tackled a third, pinning him, knife at his throat. "Who's paying?" he hissed. The man spat. "You're dead, Kane." Elias knocked him out with a sharp blow, moving before the others regrouped. Carver stepped from the trees, rifle raised, his eyes glinting like steel. "You're stubborn," he said, voice calm as ice. "This valley's ours." Elias stood, unarmed, Amos at his side. "It's his," he said, nodding to the bear. Amos reared, roaring, his shadow massive, claws gleaming. Carver fired a tranq dart, grazing Amos's shoulder. The bear staggered, growling but held firm. Elias snapped, lunging at Carver, tackling him into the snow. Fists flew, blood stung Elias's eyes, mixing with the storm. Carver's knife flashed, slicing Elias's arm, pain searing like fire. Elias pinned him, rage burning hotter. "For Clara, for Lily," he growled, voice breaking, the names tearing from his throat like a wound reopened. A howl split the night, not Amos but wild, raw, wolves, a pack, their eyes glinting from the ridge, drawn by the storm's chaos or the valley's call. Carver's men froze, guns wavering, fear etching their faces. Elias rose, blood dripping from his arm, staining the snow. "Leave, or they finish it," he said, voice steady despite the pain. Amos roared again, the dart's effect fading, his strength unyielding. Carver scrambled back, shouting retreat, his men fleeing, abandoning drones and gear in the snow's embrace. Dawn broke, quiet and cold, the valley still under a soft gray sky. Elias leaned against Amos, bandaging his arm with cloth torn from his coat, the bear's flank warm, his breathing strong. He burned the NorthPulse crates, their logo curling to ash, the acrid smoke stinging his lungs. A radio crackled, its last message faint. "Pull out, Kane's not worth it." They'd return someday, Elias knew, but not soon. He led Amos to an untouched valley, where snow fell clean and the air tasted of pine. By a small fire, its glow soft, Amos rested his head on Elias's knee, his weight grounding him. Elias pulled out Clara and Lily's photo, its edges worn, their faces faded, but alive in his heart. "We did it," he whispered, voice thick, a tear falling. Amos's eyes met his, deep as the wild's own soul.
Years later, rangers spoke in hushed tones of a man and bear, their tracks woven through the mountains. A boy at a Yukon sanctuary saw a cave, its walls scarred with claw marks, a faded photo tucked in stone. Beside it, Amos was carved, sharp and eternal. Snow fell gentle, dusting the ridge where Elias and Amos walked, their steps one, the valley's heart beating wild and free.